Welcome, everyone. As Amy said, my name is Mark Burdick. I work for Novell. I'm a sales engineer located in the Hartford, Connecticut area. And I am going to give you some information pertaining to Novell's mobility solution as a whole, and then we're going to talk in detail around the Filr product specifically. So in the realm of mobile computing, generally, anyone that has a tablet or a phone and whatnot, they refer to this generally as mobility, right? It's a way to take computing with you and be mobile. But at Novell, we don't call it mobility, we call it life. I mean, this is how organizations work today. Everyone out there has people knocking on the doors, wanting to use tablets, wanting to use phones, wanting to do more than what has been kind of handed out to them so far. So in the past, getting to work meant getting in your car, going through who knows what in terms of commute, dealing with traffic, leaving early, sitting at a desk, having your little space in a cube or an office or whatnot. And really, with mobility, working now could literally mean that you're anywhere. I mean, here's a quick image of somebody sitting at the beach on the phone, and I can tell you, firsthand, I've done conference calls from my backyard, from the car. We've all done this. This is how things happen today. So what's different? Well, with the advent of the smartphone and the tablet, users have ways to take things with them. And what really is kind of driving this is, if you think about it, in terms of the iPhone specifically, there have been more iPhones sold than babies that are born every single day. The Android platform has 110 plus different devices that are out there. And no matter how much we might not want them to, workers are showing up with their own personal devices and using them on the job. And folks may or may not be taking advantage of what these devices can do for them, including the different security aspects. Now, in addition to folks showing up with mobile devices and wanting them to be part of their workday, we still have folks that have laptops. We have folks that work remotely with desktop systems and things like that. And, these people, these devices, they're out there, they're everywhere. Folks want to use them, they've got their own, they take company provisioned pieces. This stuff is all out there, and we've got to have a way to kind of keep tabs on it and control the access and so on and so forth. And at the same time, we still have to make sure that they can have access to their documents, that they can print things out, and that they just generally have the tools that they need to do their jobs. So in Novell, we have, as I mentioned, an entire mobility space to address content access, to address printing, and to address device management. Today, we're going to talk about this first item, which is anywhere file access. And that is Filr. So, we started this whole thing 30 plus years ago with file and print on a network, and we've been doing this stuff really the entire time we've been around. So who better to kind of revolutionize file access and such from mobile devices but us? In today's organizations, if you go into any IT arena, or even into an end user for that matter, and ask them this question, where are your files? The chances of actually being able to get a complete answer are pretty low, let alone a very comprehensive one. Folks are using map drives, as we see here from the little snippet in the top left. They're using online services like Google Drive, like Box. People are sharing things on LinkedIn. They're putting things out on Twitter. You can see from the DOS box here that folks will share things out from their machines on local networks. This is all done in a way to share things, and more often than not is done with very innocent intentions. But doing these things, leveraging these services, can sometimes lead to massive security holes. So Novell's solution to solve this problem is Filr. We have native applications for Windows, for Mac, for iOS, for Android, and then kind of a fallback, if you will, for the everyone else all-encompassing bucket of web access so that users can have access to their files from anywhere, at any time, on any device. And we've added to that the ability to share content with anyone that might be anywhere, at any time, on any other device. And those users that can be shared with do not necessarily have to be users inside of the Filr system at your organization. So the quick view here is a Windows Explorer view. The quick view here is the mobile device view. So this is a native application view taken from a tablet. You can see the little larger screen. You'd see the exact same information on a smartphone. And it's the same application and view that you would see on both iOS and Android devices. So it doesn't matter if you've got a Samsung Galaxy Tab or an iPhone. This is how it would look. The only difference is the size of the screen. If you are using a web browser, which incidentally can be still on an iOS device, an Android device, it could be on Mac, it can be on Windows, you can be running a Linux machine. We support Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, all of the major browsers will work, and again, from any device. So if you log in with the web interface, this is the view that you have here. I'm not focusing a lot on this right now because I'm actually going to show you these things in a couple of minutes. But you can get access to the same content. And you see similar view. I'm going to back up one screen here just to show you from the mobile device. As an example, you see My Files, Shared with Me, Net Folders, and then down here on the bottom is Shared by Me. When we go to the web view, you see all four of those are shown across the top. And that's really an aesthetic thing. With web browsers, you've got a little bit more real estate available. So putting all four of them together is easy to do. But on smart devices, specifically phones with smaller screens, we've moved Shared by Me to another area so that the other three can remain up top because those are what the users will reference most commonly. Other than that, the functionality is the same. Little bit of an overview of how Filr works. And this is a little bit of a complicated diagram. I'm going to try to really kind of summarize this up quickly. So the important points here is looking on the right-hand side, you see existing storage. That's what I really want to drive out here, is that it's existing storage locations. So if you have Novell servers, if you have Windows servers, if you have network appliances, these things that already have content on them will continue to be the things that have content on them. All your rules, your permissions, your access rights, the users, the groups, your backup solutions, your antivirus solutions, everything you have today stays exactly as it is today and where it is today. On the left side, I've spoken about these where we have the workstation plugins, we have mobile device applications, we have the browser and web dev access. These are the pieces I was just showing you the quick screenshots of, and in the middle is Filr. So Filr is a replacement or a new version of the user experience to access content. And we have the ability to support via LDAP connections both eDirectory and Active Directory. In fact, we can support both at the same time, and in fact, we can even support multiple instances. So if you have two eDirectory trees and an Active Directory domain and you want to access users from all three of them in one Filr system, that's possible. I'm not going to get into a lot of the rest of the stuff going on here, other than to mention this red box across the top. We do have the ability, if you turn it on, to search through and index all of the content that you connect to Filr. So as users are looking for things, they can search Filr and find relevant content from data that's inside of the files. And any user that does a search will only be given back links to content that they have access to. If you move forward and take a look, the important things I want to point out here is that we support Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, and BlackBerry devices. and we support them. This is for the full mobility space. We support them for the file access and synchronization, which is really the Filr piece, right across the board, with a couple of minor exceptions for Linux. We can't do the full synchronization to Linux because it's browser only, but otherwise it's all there. And you can see also too that we also support mobile printing from all those devices. So, you know, plain and simple, it's a single point solution that is a true solution. It works with all your users inside and outside, internal to the organization and external to the organization. It works on all devices from all locations, period. If you want to look up anything more on the mobility solution in general, our website, www.novell.com/mobility, will bring you to an area where we do have content that really deals with all three of the major products, again, file access, mobile printing, and device management. With that, I'm going to close out the slide deck, and I'm going to go ahead and give you an opportunity to see the Filr product. So very quickly, I'm going to start up a Windows virtual machine. We'll put that into the background. But I'm going to work initially here from my Mac. The window that is open right now is the Mac Finder window. And if you look up here on the top, you see that I have in my favorites, I have a folder called Filr. This is a folder that was created when I installed the native Mac Finder extension into my machine. And by clicking on this, it brings up my shared with me area. So this is content that folks have shared out to me directly. They wanted to make sure that I saw it. And also the My Files area. My Files is equivalent to my home directory. So a lot of organizations use an H drive for home directories, and if that's what you use, your H drive would be exactly the same in terms of the content and such as what would show up here in My Files. Now if I switch gears briefly and go back to my virtual Windows instance, I've done the same thing to my Windows machine that I did to my Mac machine, which is I installed the Filr Windows Explorer extension. So bringing up Explorer on my Windows machine gives me all of the folders that I'm used to seeing on the left-hand side, plus in my favorites area here, and you see another one down in libraries, same area on disk, but I have this Novell Filr favorite. And again, My Files shared with me. And if I come in here and look, I will see the exact same content that I see by looking in my Mac Finder window. All right, a couple things to show you here are file synchronization. So let's take, I'm going to take a JPEG file here, and I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to come over into My Files as a location, and I'm going to paste it. So you see now I have this 0214 document. And if I go back to Windows, you see it is not here. Even if I choose to refresh, it is not there. The Filr plugin will, by itself, in the background, automatically, and you see the spinning wheel up here, synchronize content between my local cached copy of data and the Filr system. Now that the synchronization is complete, I can come back to my Windows install, and this again will do this automatically, but I'm going to force it. When this synchronizes, it will pick up the fact that I have a new file, excuse me, and it will bring that file down into my local cached copy here. So just by putting a file into my Mac Finder My Files, that synchronized into the Filr system itself, so that I now have a master copy inside of Filr. And then the synchronization to Windows saw that there was new content, and you see now that I have this JPEG file available here inside my Windows Explorer. I'm going to switch back to my Mac interface, bring up Google Chrome, and I'm going to log into Filr through a web interface. Now, I'm putting in a username and password here, and you didn't see me do that with the plugin extensions. And the reason being is because I have my username and password saved. So if I open the console for Filr, and this is on my Mac, you see that I have my server location, and then I have a username and password stored, and they're saved. That's the only reason that I didn't have to type anything in. If I change my password on the network, it will prompt me and tell me that I have to update my password in the plugin. So in the web interface, you see now here, again, I have the 214 document visible here inside the web browser. And here it is, same exact photo showing inside of a web browser. And just for the sake of flexibility, let's go over, and on Windows, let's start up Firefox just because it's different. And we'll do the same login and be able to see the same exact content here as well. Now, one other thing that we have available to us is, in addition to the disconnected access, meaning I can synchronize content and take it with me, like I would have from the Novell iFolder service, and in addition to the connected access that I would get from the net storage or web access solution, I also have a little bit of a social networking flair thrown in here as well, which is the ability to have a related conversation or discussion around a file. And that happens here inside of these little comment dialogues. So many of these are blank, which simply means that there are no comments. So if I open one, it will show me what is there, which is 0. You can see that here. But it will also allow me to add one. If I see numbers, I can open this up to see comments that have been added. Now, in this particular case, this is a PowerPoint file that I might have shared out across my organization to 3 or 4 or 5 other people and asked them to comment on the content. Maybe I'm putting this together ahead of a meeting, and I want to get some information on what content is useful, what's relevant, what's accurate, what's missing. So I share this out from my home directory. I don't make any copies. I don't move it around. I don't attach it to an email, nothing. That's the only place in the world that this file exists as a master copy, and I share it from there. I hand out access, read-only, to 3 or 4 different people, and I ask them to look at this file and comment on it. And all of those folks can come to this comment area, and they can give me information similar to what you see here. Somebody could just say, yeah, this is good as it is. Someone else might say, well, you know what, add something to page 2. Let's put in an option for item X. Let's take page 3 out. And all of the other folks that have access are able to see this little discussion that's going on. So we can almost, we can almost have a revision process here in a discussion before the file ever gets touched. And more importantly, I remain the sole author and steward of the master file, yet I can take the collaborative comments and leverage them to determine what I might make for changes in this file. So this is all related to a document and associated to a document, but it is outside of the document. So none of this ever goes into the doc itself, unless I choose to take something in particular and add it in. Sharing content is very simple to do. Literally hit the drop down and click share. From here, I can determine if I want to share this with another internal user. So let's say our president, Bob Flynn. I can add him in just by picking him from the list. He's an internal user. He's in the list of users in the system. I can pick him out from the list and simply add him. And once a user has been added in, I get to choose the kind of rights that I want him to have for this particular file. So the default is to give him read-only or viewer access, but I can choose that to editor. If I do, in fact, want to let somebody modify my files, I can. And you see here on the bottom that I have an option to give him the ability to reshare this content. So I can let him reshare this particular file with other users inside my Filr system. I say OK. And there's a checkbox here to notify folks that have gotten new or modified access. And I would say, OK, the system will simply send him an email and says, Mark shared a file with you. And he's got a link that he can come right back to it. If he already has access and I want to remove his access, I simply check that or click that little circle with the X in it, and he would be taken off of the list. And by saying OK, he would get an email that says your access was removed. It is literally that simple. What's even better is you see here for this instance of my name, Mark Burdick, you see it says external user. That's because I shared it out to an email address. So I could literally type in an email address of somebody outside of the system, give them viewer access, and say OK. And that's it. It's done. I can now come to my web interface, and let me log out here so that there's no conflict. Okay, so I can log into my public email, and there will be an email here. Got sorted to my spam. No, it did not. All right, so this is not going to come through. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I take that back. I forgot about the rule I have for Novell addresses. So you see, this is what the email would look like. It shows who shared content to me, the name, and it shows the address that it came from. Inside of here, I have a direct link to that file that I can click on. Now, as an external user, never having used the system, it's going to first ask me to register. So I put in my information. I choose a password. I confirm that password, and I register. That's it. Close the window. I can get rid of the original message because that's settled. Refresh. I have a new email from the admin, and I've been confirmed. It's that simple. Now when I come here, I put in my username, which is my email address, I put in my password, and I click sign in. And now in the shared with me area is going to be a list of all of the content that has been shared with me. Once I'm in the system, I can add access to other files. So I can share this secondary file, put in my same user account here, view access, and you know what? Let's set this one to expire. 7 days. And say OK. If I simply click shared with me again, that extra file is now visible. This is how fast the system works. And this is literally how easy it is to grant access. Now let's look at the flip side so that you can see it. I'm going to go back into this, this image file here, go back to the share area, and I'm going to remove access and say OK. Again, click on shared with me, second file is now gone. That's how fast this thing is able to process. I mean, obviously it was done long before I got here. And if I come and look in my Novell folder again, in my personal email, there will be an email from the admin. Oops, sorry. That's from the admin saying that the new file was shared. It didn't send through the note. It's supposed to send a note here and it'll probably come through in a couple minutes, but to send a note to say that the access was removed because I was a modified recipient. So at this point, Amy, I think if you want, we can go ahead and open up Q&A now. We'll get it open early because that will likely drive, some of the other things that that are worth showing here.
Okay, perfect. Now just another reminder, if anybody does have any questions, you can put those through on the chat or the Q&A. Let's see, the first question. Is the sync my files functionality built on the iFolder code base?
No, it is not. No, it's all new functionality that has been built in for the plug-in pieces for Mac and Windows. You can do the sync directly to those plug-in pieces, and it's controllable in the admin interface as to whether you want to initially enable that or not. And on the mobile devices, it is configured as basically a download. So the user would manually make an effort to download a copy of the file for local access.
Okay, the next question, when sharing a file, do we need to have access control allowed on home files?
Could we possibly get a little more information on the question? I'm not really sure that I follow it exactly as it may have been intended.
Okay, while we wait for that more information, we'll answer a couple other questions here. Can files be shared from the Explorer plugin instead of the website?
So I'll say sort of. I'm going to go ahead and log out. Oops, hold on one moment. I have some windows in my way. Let me log out of the interface here. The web interface right now is the sharing point. But what would happen is if I was in Explorer and I right-click, I will have an option that's presented to me from within Filr to share, which it's not picking up. Let me switch directories. Not sure why this isn't picking it up. But what happens is when the right-click context menu comes up with the sharing option, what it does is it automatically opens the web browser. This is why. Yeah, I honestly don't know why this isn't picking this up. Something on my system is out of whack here. Why don't we move to the next question, and I'll continue to try to get this to work.
Okay, the next question, how do you control who a user can share a file with? And can you prevent a user from sharing with an external user?
So the controls are done on the administrative side. Couple things to know. Number one, users do not have to be granted the permission to share content. So they can have no ability to share. they can be granted the permission to share with internal users, external users, or both. Content, specific folders, for example, can, as they're being set up, be configured as allowed to be shared or not. You have the ability as an admin also to go in and look to see what content a user has shared and who they've shared it with. And you have the exact same little circular button with the X in it that you can break any share that has been created at any time. So there actually is quite a bit of control that you have available to who can share what with whom, and things kind of layer on top of one another. Another point to be aware of is that a user cannot, through the Filr system, elevate privileges. So for example, if a user in Filr has access to a particular file as read-only, they will never be asked or presented with the option to share that file to someone else in read-write. So you can never use the Filr system to elevate privileges so that you can, somehow gain access to edit a file. So even though the user might have the right to share content read-write out of a particular folder, a particular file in that folder they may, as an individual, only have access to in read-only mode. And if that's the case, then even with their ability to share read-write, they can't do it because they, as an individual, don't have read-write to that particular file.
All right, thanks. So this is the clarification to the previous question. When we set rights to home files, we do not grant access control. Is that right needed on any file to allow the user to grant access to others?
So I believe what's being described is that a home folder would be created and then a user is made the owner of the folder, which gives them a level of permission. And if that's the case, then effectively that's all that's necessary. I mean, at that point they own the folder, they own the content, and they would, if they were given permission to reshare content internally, externally, or both, then they would have the ability to determine what rights folks would have if they did share content to other people. Does that answer the question?
All right. If that doesn't answer the question, just let us know and we can clarify a little bit more. So
right, and I restarted. Oh, hang on, Amy. I restarted my Filr instance, so you can see now here the sharing options are available in my right click. So this would be, I would come in here and say I want to share this file. Right click to get the context menu and say share. And what it does when I prompt it to do a sharing event is it brings up either my default browser, which in this case is Firefox. I'm going to close this because I want to show you the alternative. Back to the console and an embedded browser. And I want to note here, if I use the default browser, I have to authenticate into the system, but if I use the embedded browser, I do not. So even though I'm going to pick share and it's going to launch a browser instance, it's the native browser inside the Filr service. So I'm not logging in to Filr a second time to be able to do this share. So it is still a separate process with this browser instance that does the sharing, but it does. That was not supposed to happen, but I'll authenticate anyway. But it does feel more integrated because it is, the browser that's part of Filr. And you see that it's just kind of moving its way along, going right to the particular file, and I can come in here, add the user that I want to share it to, add them into the list of allowed users, and then set the permissions. Viewer, and OK. And that would be true, any of the files. They all work in the same way. Let's see if this See if this pass-through authentication will go this time. No, didn't want to. All right, well, we'll leave that off for now. I'll mention that to our support folks. Maybe I have something configured wrong on my system.
Okay,
next question.
So it looks like the next question: can shared files be saved by the user it was shared to?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is that because it's a service that does have browser-based controls and browser-based access, the way that browsers work requires that you actually deliver the content to the machine, and then the machine can kind of manipulate and do stuff with it. So because of that, we have to basically get the content over to them with the browser alone. Or let's say it's a PDF file or something like that. We have to get the file to them in order to open in, let's say, Adobe Reader. So it can be saved. If they make changes to it, the changes that they make would only be in their local copy if you have not given them edit access. So they would not be able to, in that scenario, do anything to the master copy. But they would be able to make copies of what you shared to them. And another thing I do want to show briefly, and I'll do this here for this PowerPoint. You see I have an option to view HTML. So I actually have a rendering system available to me on the back end that if I don't have a PowerPoint program, as an example, installed, I can use the rendering engine inside of Filr to open that PowerPoint file, go through, render the content, and then make it available to me as an HTML viewable document. So the content that we just looked at is all right here, rendered by Filr and shown to me in a web browser.
All right, it looks like our next question, is there an access log of some kind so you can see who has access to what?
The administrator has the ability to run reports, and there are a variety of different things that they can see. So, for example, we can look at, as an admin, we can go in and look at user activity. We can choose a particular user, or we can leave it blank to get all users. We choose a time window, and we can see what those users have done, who has accessed files, who has added files, who has purged files, so on and so forth. We can also look to see all shares that have been created, or we can look for shares created by a particular user and go through the system. So I mentioned earlier, as an admin, you can go in, you can look for what shares are in place, and if you see something on the list that maybe you don't agree with, you can break the share in the same way that you would break it here. As you look at the list, you would have the little circles and X's, and you simply click them to remove that particular share and say OK, and the access via that share would be removed. But this is all available through the administrator interface.
All right, perfect. Where are the rights for Filr access stored, inside Filr or on the file system?
Yes. All of the existing content that you have in place today has rights associated to it already. That all stays. When Filr is connected to your LDAP user store, the system gets configured with what we call a search. And it goes through your eDirectory or Active Directory or whatever you have it connected to find appropriate users and or groups that it wants, that you want it to have in the internal database of Filr. And we use that import as a way to keep things in sync between your existing data stores and the Filr info. For external users, all of the rights access that have been granted to folks outside of the organization is managed and maintained inside of Filr only. With people that are outside of your organization, they don't exist in your database. So we create an object for them inside of Filr, and then we use a proxy account to let them access the data. The proxy account has full access to the data, but Filr will manage what access the actual user gets by looking it up in the Filr database.
Okay, so it looks like the next question, can Filr be used as a primary data store reliably? And how reliable is it when using it with around 500,000 files or more?
So as a primary file store, it's perfectly reliable to do. The architecture of Filr is such that it's very scalable. So if you have large enterprises, you can put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 30, 50, whatever of these things that you need out into the organization and have them all work very cooperatively. Because it is designed and built to facilitate a very distributed architecture, larger environments may not want to leverage the internal storage capability of Filr itself as a file store. So using, a large file server on the back end or a NetApp appliance or something like that would likely be a more desirable way to do it, and then have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different Filr appliances servicing requests. But it's not to say that you can't use it as a primary store. It's perfectly fine to do. What we typically recommend and suggest is that you look at not the number of files or the amount of data on disk as your markers, but instead look at the concurrent user numbers. So an organization that has 10,000 users but works like in a shift rotation and might only have, let's say, out of those 10,000, 1,000 active users in the system at any given point in time, their needs for Filr would be different than an organization with 3,000 users that have all 3,000 active at the same time. So you look at the users, first of all, look at the concurrent users that are connected, and you want to look for your peak load. And then what we do is we recommend that, I recommend personally, for up to about 350 to 400 concurrent users, that you work with a single Filr appliance with everything on one box. If you go beyond that number, then you want to split to a large deployment model, is what we call it, and stand up a database server and an indexing search server. And then one Filr appliance per roughly 500 concurrent users. So a 3,000 user environment with 3,000 concurrent connections would have a database and an index, and then a half dozen Filr servers.
Okay, perfect. Let's see, the next question. Can the principal page be customized?
Yes, we refer to that as, and I think a lot of organizations refer to that as branding. And in fact, I just did a trade show with one of the Novell partners that built their own server specifically for the trade show and branded it. And we used their branded instance for the demos and such, and the interaction with, with the folks that were there to interact with. So you can brand it. It's fairly straightforward to do, and quite honestly, if you have if you have the image files and the color schemes and stuff that you want to work with, you can do it in 10 to 15 minutes.
Perfect. And then there was a question here, can we see the administrator interface?
Unfortunately, I do not have access to the admin interface of this system. If there's an interest in seeing the admin interface, we could certainly set something up a little bit more one-on-one to actually show you, in some detail what sort of interface is there, what sort of options are there, and really why these different options get used and in what situations.
Okay. When an LDAP account is disabled or deleted, are all of the files that are that the disabled account shared out access rights removed?
So there's a bit of an it depends on this. So there's controls for the LDAP search as to what happens with the user account. If you have the LDAP search running automatically and automatically adding and deleting and purging users from the system based on the matching criteria, then the user's content could be automatically removed. Files that they have created shares with, so they've shared things out to other people, those will stay in place. The admin would go in and remove those manually.
All right. How does Filr access existing files on network drives, for example, NSS? And if users have rights to other users' folders, let's say in the home directory, how would that look in my files?
The access method is NCP, so we use the Novell Connect protocol for Open Enterprise and NetWare servers, or CIFS, Common Internet File System, for other devices. That would be like NetApp appliances, Windows servers, so on and so forth. So we're communicating across the network from the Filr appliance to the file store. And again, on the Novell side, we use NCP. For other systems, we use CIFS. As far as user access, I guess I'm not 100% sure of exactly the question being asked about, user folders and stuff, but I can possibly give you more insight with this. When the Filr system is configured, you create an option for allowing the My Files to automatically connect the user to their home drive, or not. That's up to you. Most organizations like to do that. It's like, hey, great, it's a quick replacement for our H drive, as many organizations call it. So they do that. On the other side, all the other drive letters can be configured inside of an area we refer to as net folders. So you can take all of your public shares, your departmental shares, your group shares, and you can map them, connect them to the net folder space. And then with the right user and group level associations inside the Filr, Filr will let them have access to the content on top of, or in addition to, or in parallel to, I'm not really sure what the right phrase might be, but Filr will allow them to have access to the content that they would otherwise have access to via mapped drives. So it would simply show up here in the net folders space. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, perfect. Are there separate software pieces, search, database, and Filr?
Yes. When you get the software, it all comes bundled as single virtual appliance images. If you're doing a small deployment, which is one of the early on questions that you answer as you're booting up the virtual appliance, if you're doing a small deployment, it will enable all three services, a database, a search index server, and then the Filr appliance itself. If you instead tell it that you're doing a large deployment, it will not enable the search index or the database. It will enable only the Filr appliance piece itself. And then when you get into the config for Filr, you would give it the configuration information as to where the database server is and where the index server is that it would communicate with.
Okay, can you share files from Novell Vibe?
I'm going to presume that this question is based on using Vibe as the data store and then share it via Filr. And the short answer is if you have a UNC path or a drive mapping into the Vibe location where the files are, then you could, because as a user you'd have access to them, so you could simply share them out. But we are currently working on, a connector for our Vibe system specifically that will make it much easier to do that. And we're also looking at other changes that we may make to integrate Vibe and Filr more closely together in the future.
Okay, the next question. If Filr desktop client could default block and then set single user could use desktop client connect to Filr?
So can you repeat that question?
Yes. Let's see. If Filr desktop client could default block and then set single user could use desktop client connect to Filr.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what the question's asking.
Okay, so if we can get some clarification on that question, we'll just move on to the next one. Let's see. Okay, let's see the next question here. Filr appliances, and are there separate VMs?
So I think this is probably related to the question one or two steps back. The Filr appliance ships as a holistic whole. It has everything in it. So it has search index, it has the database for MySQL, and then it has the Filr software itself. If you are doing a large deployment model, there are individual VMs that you can download and would download for the MySQL and for the search index server pieces. So when you do a large deployment, you put in the MySQL VM, you put in the search index VM, and then you put in as many Filr VMs as you need, configuring them as large deployments so that they only enable the Filr piece. And then you point them to the other VMs that you stood up for search index and database.
Okay, perfect. And the last question I'm seeing here, unless anyone has any more, you can put those through on the chat and Q&A if you still do have other questions. But it looks like our last question right now, just briefly, what are the major differences between Vibe and Filr?
Filr is really intended to fill a space where it's all about sharing files and accessing files from anywhere at any time by anybody on any device. And that's what this is really all about. Vibe takes it to another level. Yes, you can share content and you can do those things like you can do in Vibe, but you can do quite a bit more. So you can actually do interactive collaboration. You can spin up groups of people, teams inside of Vibe and have workspaces. You can do wikis and microblogs and things like that. So there's more that you can do with Vibe. It's a more fully functioned product overall. But the file sharing aspect is more functional from a Filr perspective. You know, what you can do, how you do it, things like that. One big difference from a sharing perspective is in Vibe, if you want to have an external entity be part of a workspace to collaborate with internal users, that external party has to actually be a licensed user in the Vibe system in order to give them access. Whereas with Filr, they do not.